Hi, I'm David Bedford, Liverpool Beatles historian and author. We're taking a virtual wander through the Beatles story in Liverpool, and today we're going to look at George Martin's handwritten notes for when he recorded the album of Help with the Beatles. Now this took place February 1965. Now when these were unveiled, again I was brought in by the Beatles Story to talk to local television, local media about them, and just seeing these, this is real Beatles history. It's amazing. Because these notes have never been in public before. They've not really been looked at for 50 years. And really what they are is, song by song, George Martin had broken down the songs he was recording with the Beatles for the album. Then he was noting down who was going to be on which of the tracks, how they were going to actually record it. This was a groundbreaking thing for the Beatles because they were now recording on 4 tracks. Basically what that means is before then they recorded only on 2 tracks, so they had to put all the instruments and all the music backing onto 1 track, and then you could record the vocals onto the 2nd track, and then you mix them together. So that's why some of those early mono recordings, when they're trying to make them stereo, it separates the music on one side and the vocals on the other, because that's all they could do. Once you get to 4 tracks, that means you can record something on track 1, 2 and 3 separately. Then you can mix all of those onto track 4. Then you can go back and reuse those 3 tracks and keep going. Now obviously the more times you do that, you do lose some of the quality. So the idea is not to overdo that. But all the digital remastering we get from those original recordings just show how good the original recordings were. So now they've got 4 tracks to play with. For George Martin, instead of just saying vocals on this track, instruments on this one, he could actually do a bit of mixing. So let's look at the notes, and particularly we're going to look at Ticket to Ride. Now this is a copy, obviously from George Martin's handbook. Now what he put is, so Ticket to Ride, approximately 3 minutes and 9 seconds, which again was long, because don't forget, back in the late 50s, early 60s, rock and roll songs, if you went over 2.5 minutes, radios wouldn't play them. So we're over 3 minutes, and he's got track 1, bass and drums. So you can see the departure here, instead of having all the instruments on 1 track. So bass and drums on track 1. Track 2, 2 guitars, John on Fender and George on a 12-string Rickenbacker. Track 3, voices, John's with Paul above occasionally. So that's where Paul would do the harmony. But then once you've got all that, you could then put overdubs on. So what he could then add, say for track 4, overdubbing John's voice, Ringo on tambourine, George on Fender, Paul on Epiphone guitar. So already they're experimenting, they're expanding how they can record their songs. Another one on here is Another Girl. Now this is only just over 2 minutes. So he's put 3 tracks as before. Voices, Paul solo with John and George. George plays the Jumbo Gibson acoustic, John on Fender. But then they returned later that evening. So again he's put it to 8:30 in the evening, the back. Overdub, Paul double track, John occasionally, Ringo tom tom and George on the Gretsch. And the end bit, edit number 7. So again, they're doing all the different tracks, layering them on top of each other, and then deciding which bits that they like from which song. So this was groundbreaking. It really was. This changed how the Beatles made records, how George Martin could expand what the Beatles were doing and make more of the songs. And suddenly they're getting more complicated. And of course, as you go down the road, this means by the time they get into doing Sgt. Pepper, they can spend months in the studio, layering different tracks, overdubbing, and coming up with more complex arrangements, because they now have the technology to do that.